Karen Armstrong, as many of you already know, is a British author of more than 20 books on religion, exploring what Islam, Judaism, and Christianity have in common and how our faith shapes world history and drives current events. In 2008, Armstrong called for drawing up what she called a charter for compassion, a document that transcends religious, ideological, and national difference. Supported by leading thinkers from many traditions, the Charter calls on us all to live with compassion, as epitomized in the so-called Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In an interview on CBC Radio, she was asked a question about compassion, and I was surprised by her answer when she responded by saying that a lot of people, both religious and secular, don't want to be compassionate. They want to be right. I'll come back to this. In our reading this morning from 1 Corinthians, Paul feels obliged to write to the church at Corinth about the dissensions and the quarreling that have reared their ugly head in that community. The church is so polarized that Paul is moved to ask, is Christ divided? Well, I guess it's a kind of an understatement to say that this was not the last time that the church has experienced division. Examples are all too easy to find in denominations like our own, the United Church of Canada, and in others. John Sutherland Bunnell, in his book, Fifth Avenue Sermons, tells us that in the Church of God, a branch broke off, calling itself the True Church of God, and then another splinter happened, and that produced the only true Church of God. Maybe it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that another division might give birth to the only really, really honest to goodness, cross my heart and hope to die, true Church of God. And then there's another church I read about, and I think it's in Pennsylvania, that has been split for ages because years ago, one group in the church wanted to have sauerkraut at a church dinner, and another group didn't want to have sauerkraut, and the two groups haven't spoken since. Certainly, we all have stories or experiences that point toward this human pathology of our need to be right. What lies behind this need to be right? What fear or insecurity engenders this divisiveness? And it is about fear, I think, but fear of what? Is it a fear of losing ourself? Is it a fear of losing one's identity? I think that it's probably true of many of our relationships in life, whether it's our relationships with institutions like the church, as well as our personal relationships with other people, that we sometimes are afraid of losing ourselves, of losing our identity, about not being sure of who we are apart from that particular institution or that person. And if we're insecure about stuff like that, then I think we're more likely to build walls and make judgments about who is in and who is out. When we feel in danger of losing our identity, when we feel insecure about who we are, as a United Church person, for example, or simply as a Christian, then we need to be right. And in order for me to be right, someone else has to be wrong. And maybe this is why it's sometimes so difficult for us, in the context of our faith, to simply say, this is my experience. This is truth for me. And just leave it at that. without telling other people that they must have the same experience and they must believe the same thing. Instead of the arrogance that gives rise to an I'm right, so you must be wrong kind of attitude, perhaps we're called to a bit of humility, of acknowledging that our knowledge and our experience of truth is partial and limited. And this is what theologian Reinhold Niebuhr meant when he said that we human beings, finite creatures that we are hemmed in by the necessities and limitations of natural existence. We're caught up and we're ruled by certain givens in life. We may like to believe that we as individuals or our group collectively have the final word or the ultimate vantage point, when the truth is that no one person or group does. But this is how factions arise. One party will start to glory in its angle on reality. A particular partial perspective will be absolutized and treated as though it were the ultimate. Another group will do the same with its slightly different point of view. So what are these limitations that we're talking about? Well, consider first of all the limitations of space. I can't see everything. I am constrained in what I can know and appreciate by physical limitations. And as a consequence, all but a tiny fraction of reality exists outside my small circle of awareness. Or consider limitations of time. My time on Earth is just a speck in the pages of history. Those events taking place during my lifetime have previous causes, many of which I am only dimly aware of, and many more to which I am completely oblivious. And the subsequent outcome of these events in the future, long after I'm dead and gone, are similarly outside my circle of awareness. Add to this material limitations. The letter to the Hebrews claims that what is seen was made out of what cannot be seen. If there are invisible influences at work in the world, whether they be atoms or angels, modesty requires that I confess that I see only the material result. And all of this simply means that I am a finite creature, that I'm subject to the limitations of human existence. Niebuhr says that our problem arises when we claim that we transcend our limitations more than is actually the case. Our partial perspectives would not be a problem, Niebuhr says, were it not for the fact that our egos take over and we claim total knowledge when we, in fact, have only partial knowledge. The church in Corinth was polarized around particular personalities. There was Paul, and there was Apollos, and there was Cephas. One of the parties even claimed that they had exclusive rights on the name Christ. Today, this would sound something like, well, you're not really a Christian because you don't believe in the virgin birth, or you don't believe in the divinity of Jesus, or you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. But rather than being flattered, Paul wants nothing to do with it. Is Christ divided, he says? Or we might add, is faith divided? Is truth divided? Is God divided? The fault of the parties that Paul names is not that they say ours is the truth, but that they say ours is the only truth, and therefore yours is not the truth. The guilt of schism is when each party attacks the other and denies that others have any truth at all. When individuals or groups act as though they have a monopoly on truth or a monopoly on God, then God is diminished. When arrogance and pride take over, then God is mocked. Dag Hammarskjöld addressed this in his markings when he wrote, "There is a pride of faith more unforgivable and more dangerous than the pride of the intellect." Now, while Paul addresses the problem of divisions that have arisen among Christian believers, I think we're also called to examine our relationships, not only with other Christian people and other Christian communities, but also our relationships with people of other faiths. And we've talked about this. In the past 30 years, the United Church of Canada has encouraged its members to engage with those of other faiths, to explore the things that we have in common, and to learn about the ways in which we differ. And over the last 20 years or so, there have been at least 3 studies that explored our relationship as Christians with people of other faiths. And these may be familiar to you. The first was called Toward a Renewed Understanding of Ecumenism, which encouraged us as United Church people to see ecumenism in a new way, not just as church-centered, but as world-centered. Not just concerned about our relationships with other Christian churches, but also concerned with our relationships with people of other faiths. It called on the Christian church in general and the United Church in particular to continue to testify to the truth that we believe, but to do so with a spirit of humility, with genuine respect for those of other faiths, with an openness to the insight, wisdom, and grace that God's unpredictable Spirit has revealed through people of other religious traditions and those of none at all. The second study was called Bearing Faithful Witness, United Church-Jewish Relations Today, which was obviously about the relationship between the Christian community and the Jewish community. And the third study, which was a study on United Church-Muslim relations, was called That We May Know Each Other. So the bottom line is that religious zeal does not guarantee truth. These documents all suggest. Christians, therefore, should speak modestly, mindful of the dim glass through which every person looks. If we have a sense of who we are as Christians, if we have a sense of identity about what we believe, about what truth is for us, then it should not be too threatening to engage in a respectful and open dialogue with those whose beliefs are different from our own. And maybe, just maybe, we can let go of our need to be right. I hope so. Thanks be to God.